I'm standing here not as an individual, but actually as representing a huge organisation around the audit, which aims to provide high quality information on processes and outcomes of maternity services. We're particularly interested in promoting information at grassroots level to individual trusts and boards, and even at site level, so that you know and understand what your processes and outcomes are, and you can compare them with those of others in the area that are similar to your own. In terms of acknowledgements, I just want to highlight on this slide that we actually have a Women and Families Information Group, and this is really important to our collaborative thinking on the NMPA in terms of making sure that the women's voice is inputting into what we collect in terms of the information and the measures that we decide upon. So it's not just about sitting in a room with obstetricians, midwives and paediatricians, but it's actually involving the voice of women. And if you see on the right side of my slide, also there's a huge number of other stakeholders that input and advise us through our clinical reference group. Here's what I wanted to do today, just briefly talk about the NMPA, which I've just introduced, so I'm well on the way. What we've achieved so far, some of the key findings from our first clinical report, which came out last year, but actually was revised recently, and we've got a revised version now on our website. And the revisions were particularly around an issue that was identified after we produced our report, and on investigation we had to do some reanalysis and remove some of the we haven't removed any measures, but we've removed some of the criteria around some of those measures. So in fact we've had to remove presentation from some of our measures, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. Key findings from the clinical report then, and how these findings can be used by you as midwives in terms of the delivery of care. Okay, so the organisation, the NMPA, has to deliver 3 elements. They've commissioned an organisational survey, and that was published actually last year in August. It's freely available on maternityaudit.org.uk. Please do read it. We had a 100% response rate from heads of midwifery who were responsible for collating the completion of that survey, and it does provide some very interesting highlights on the configuration of services, the services provided, and also the staffing levels. We've also produced a continuous clinical audit, as I've said, and we're going to produce one annually. And the one I'm going to talk about today relates to the 2015 and 16 year. And then we're also going to do some periodic sprint audits. We're publishing 2 this year and 2 next year. And those 2 will also, the first 2 will come out at the end of this year. Just talking a little bit about the organisational survey. I've not got time to cover it in detail, but just to highlight again that it's there, and also just to flag up with this slide some information that you might find interesting, which relates to self-reporting of the number of trusts and sites. So you'll notice that in England we have 220 sites overall, over 134 trusts, and that's 157 obstetric units, 106 alongside midwifery-led units, and 63 freestanding midwifery-led units. And these helped us to identify the reporting levels right the way down to individual units on our website. This slide highlights that where units actually are, the larger the circle, the larger the unit, and you can also see that the different types of units are highlighted in different colours. All co-located OUs and AMUs tended to be concentrated in densely populated areas, nothing that we don't know already, those of us working in practice. All obstetric units in Wales were co-located with an AMU, which is great. Only 2/3 in England were, and only 1/3 in Scotland were. So there was some country variation identified in this particular survey report. These are just some highlights from that survey, just in identifying the variation in the services available, and that we couldn't actually categorise typical units like you do with neonatal services, where you might have level 1, 2, 3 type services. You can't actually seem to identify any category for maternity services and units. We found that there was variation in access to electronic information sharing, and those midwives who work in community settings in some parts of this region will know that they don't have access to inputting data directly into the systems as we'd like them to. And in fact, actually, electronic information sharing for women is actually in its infancy. Variation in staffing provision, and also the fact that the maternity services are constantly in flux. This is a snapshot from January 2017, and if we did it today, I know it would be completely different. But one of the positive things we did find was that overall, trusts and reported that more than 3/4 of the trusts and boards offered home birth, at least one type of midwifery unit and an obstetric unit. Though in fact, I'm coming on to tell you about what it might look like now in terms of the clinical reporting about offering all 4 options for care that is recommended by Better Births. So the clinical report published recently let's move on, relates specifically to births during the period of 1st of April 2015 to the 31st of March 2016. That was about 700,000 births in total. And what we managed to do in this report is actually capture 92% of those births in our data set. 96% of trusts and boards contributed data, and from that, we sourced that information from maternity information systems locally from each individual trust in England, but also came from central databases in Scotland and Wales. So we've got 690-something thousand data sets about women and babies within this time period, which is a fantastic achievement in itself, just to get all the information. We decided that in terms of the measures that we were going to collect, we had quite robust discussions within our project team, within the clinical reference group, within the Women and Families Information Group, and came up with a number of measures, about 16 in all, that were feasible to measure, that had clinical relevance, and that had sufficient power for us to demonstrate that. So we came up then with characteristics of the women that we're caring for, and also some measures around process and outcomes. And I would just want to highlight with this slide that the report did read to some sensational headlines in the press, and that's not what we're about. The National Maternity and Perinatal Audit is actually about allowing you to make comparisons between the processes and outcomes of women in your care with those of other units. In other words, to celebrate your successes where you're doing something well, but then also perhaps thinking about where there are areas for improvement, for quality improvement for women and babies, to get the best possible care for women and babies. I'm going to give you a taster of this report, And it is a taster because I've got Sue sitting there waiting to hold up the 5-minute deadline so I don't overrun. So it's going to be a very quick whistle-stop tour through just a couple of things, but please do look at the website. And I'm going to say again, maternityaudit.org.uk, and it will be on the slides afterwards. So the first thing I'm going to talk about relates to the characteristics that we measured. We did a whole series of characteristic measurements, and they're in the report. However, I've picked 2, which I think no one will be surprised about. The first one is in relation to women's weight at booking. And you can see from this particular slide that less than half of the women who are having babies during this period had a normal BMI. And 1/5 had a BMI 30 or above. And this is at booking, remember. The interesting thing also is that there was incredible variation in maternal BMI at booking around the country. So you might want to look on the website and see what your average BMI rates were for the women in your care. Remember that women who have high BMI have increased risks. I don't need to tell you that. And may require additional services and additional monitoring. And so we have to think about how that's going to affect our services in the future. And this is another point that I also wanted to raise. Again, no one's going to be surprised. Over half of the women giving birth are aged over 30. One in 7 are over the age of 35, and in England and Scotland, we've got 2.7% of our primiparous women having babies when they're 40 or over. So we're dealing with an older, let's not call it aging, older pregnant cohort of women now, and also women who are increasing in weight, and the implications of that for the way that we deliver our services in the future. I'm just going to flag also, I'm going to go back, forward and then back again. I'm just going to show you this that came out of the organisational survey, which actually highlights how well we're doing in terms of providing the choices that Better Birth recommends, home, OU, alongside midwifery-led unit and freestanding midwifery-led unit. Now this looks quite positive overall, not as great as we might want it to be, because obviously we're working towards having all 4 choices, and we've only got about 1 in 5 units having trusts having those 4 choices available to women at the moment. However, if I go back to this, only 13% of women are giving birth in a midwife-led setting. And I think that that's really a priority for us to be thinking about. Increasing access to midwife-led birth settings must be a national priority. We've got the facilities, let's use them. The biggest difficulty that we had, though, in the NMPA was the fact that we couldn't actually identify the woman's choice of place of birth at onset of labour. Had we had that information, that would have been quite interesting, but we can't actually get that information at the moment. So we need to be asking, how are we going to capture that information so that we can make those comparisons about where they intended to have their baby at the beginning of labour and where they actually did have their baby at the time of birth. Can you read that? Is it big enough on your screen? Because it's not big enough on mine. These are the 16 measures. Anyway, they're all online. There are 2 that are highlighted in yellow. This is because those were just 2 of the measures that we decided to report outlier status on. And the reason for that is that there could be care differences that might make a difference if you were outside of what we would normally expect you to be in terms of those measures. You'll notice that there's a focus on intrapartum care. hardly any on antenatal because there isn't any measures that we could actually identify to get the antenatal information that we needed. And the same was true of postnatal. So a lot of this is actually what's feasible to measure at the moment. So we need to be thinking about how we actually perhaps record some of the other aspects of care that are currently not available to us. So I'm just going to give you a couple of these measures just to whet your appetite for looking on the website. Okay, this is the first one. Now, I want you to look very, very carefully, can you see that, at what is the measure. And this is really important when you look at any of these, okay? So this is women who are recorded as being current smokers at booking, the proportion who are no longer smoking by the time of birth. Okay, so that's actually, if you like, the denominator, okay? And then the numbers below that so that you can see, I'm going to have to lean down here, I can't see my own notes. So the women smoking at birth in England was 11.5% from this, in this year. And of those, 19.5% reported that they were not smoking at the time of the baby's birth. So 1 in 5 are giving up. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, but this is what the variation looks like. So these are all the different units, okay? And the mean is that line that runs across the graph, and all the dots represent different units. There's something wrong here, isn't there? Because there's a huge amount of variation. So where are you on this chart? You can find yourself on this chart when you look on our website. And that will be interesting in itself. Here's 3rd and 4th degree tears of women who give birth vaginally to a singleton baby in the cephalic position. So therefore, you're only talking about the women who've given birth vaginally with the baby head down at term. All right, so the proportion who sustained a 3rd or 4th degree tear. And you can see that we've got an England rate of 3.6%, slightly higher rate for primiparous women, but in terms of instrumental deliveries for both groups of primiparous and multiparous women, they are higher than the spontaneous births. This is another interesting chart. I'm not going to talk very much about it. It's called a funnel plot because I haven't got time. But essentially, what you want to do is see yourself between your trust or your unit between these outer limits. Okay, so anything above the dotted line at the top or below the dotted line at the bottom, then you might be considering yourself outside of where we would expect you to be. Okay, along the bottom, you can see we're identifying the size of the unit, and up the y-axis we've got the percentage of 3rd and 4th degree tears. So huge amount of variation. So what's happening here? Why have we got this variation? And also you might think, well, if you're above that, you must be doing something wrong. Actually, you might be doing something right. You might actually be recording 3rd and 4th degree tears more effectively. So it's not necessarily about you doing something wrong. It's about let's think about it. The converse thing is if you're below the bottom line, actually you might not be recording them. Or you might be doing something absolutely fantastic, and then that's worth sharing with people. We're not making that judgment. We're just providing you with the information so that you can think about it. Obstetric hemorrhage. Women who give birth again to a singleton baby between 37 and 42 plus 6 weeks, so term, and the proportion who sustained an obstetric hemorrhage of 1,500 mils or more. You'll notice that Scotland is missing, and that's because they don't report blood loss in a way that we can calculate this. So the number of mothers included in the analysis you can see, and we've got an overall proportion rate of 2.7%. But If you look at this, you can see that there are units outside, both above and below the lines that we would normally expect. And this variation is represented in practically all of the measures that we have looked at, all 16 measures. Now, it seems like I've been talking about things going wrong quite a lot, but actually I've just finished talking to you about skin-to-skin contact within the first hour of birth. And this was live-born babies, so all babies, I'm getting the 5 minutes, between 34 weeks and 42 weeks and 6 days, and the proportion who received skin-to-skin contact. And actually, we're not doing too badly, or so it appears, though my neonatal colleague says that's terrible, we should have 100%. But 79.8, not too bad, until you see that, okay? Okay? So there, the mean is the line across. That nice little bundle of units at the top are the FMUs. And you've got huge, wide-ranging skin-to-skin being being recorded, not reported, but recorded in our data set. Now, that tells you that there's a lot to think about, just in terms of these 16 measures and your own units. Go to our website. This is a great interactive website. We've had people looking at this and specialising in trying to get this right for you. And what it highlights is that you can search your unit, and then you can see at the bottom of here, okay, all of the things that we've been able to measure for your unit, and some things may be missing because we haven't been able to get the data, or the data is not of sufficient quality for us to include. And it also tells you where you are in terms of the funnel plot, okay, whether you're above or below where we would normally expect you to be for the size of unit that you are. Please, please do use it. So in summary, from the clinical report, just got a couple more slides after that, we're trying to provide a high-quality data set for Great Britain, England, Scotland and Wales. Northern Ireland not on board yet, but we're hoping they will come on board. Allowing a national analysis that's never been possible before. All of the data I've produced for you is risk-adjusted. That means we've taken into account the women that you care for, their age, their ethnicity, level of deprivation, etc. And we've provided on our website site-specific results for you so that you can critically interrogate those results and reflect upon what's going well and perhaps areas which you can improve for women. We are going to report a new report later this year, and the set of measures will grow as new data becomes available, and we are trying to influence that through, in England, talking to the Maternity Services data set people to try and influence what's collected. But that's down to you, midwives on the ground, making sure that that is accurately recorded, and also that we're recording meaningful data, data that we can do something with. I am very sad to report this slide, and this relates specifically to the quality of the data around trying to measure birth without intervention. Now, there's a lot of debate about what birth without intervention should be, but for the NMPA on this occasion, this is what we chose. We needed all these variables to come up with a measure for birth without intervention. And what's very sad is that currently in England, only 59% of trusts could report anaesthetic during labour and birth. And also, we only had 60% reporting of augmentation, which didn't meet our quality level, which was set at 70%. We are doing a subset analysis, however, and we're hoping to get that into the press sometime in the future. But this is about making sure that we've got the data we really need. It's not just about all the things that potentially go wrong for women and that we might need to improve on, but it's also about getting the data about what the majority of women go through, and explore whether that's right for our service. So some key messages. Please record useful, accurate information in your electronic databases. Read the reports that we've already produced. Look at your local data, celebrate the successes, and drive your improvements in care in your local area. And we can support you in that with this information as you monitor implementation of national policies such as Better Births and the Maternity Transformation Plans. Thanks very much.
A lady here? Have I got a roving mic?
I can shout probably.
Can you? You have to stand up and shout.
Okay. I was just wondering if you have any variations between overbirth and the Skintoskin.
Well, you know something, this data set is so fantastic. There's a lot you could do with it. And we recognise that we will probably have requests for that data to do those types of sub-analysis. We're doing some ourselves, but the correlation, I don't think we've done that one. But that one's certainly food for thought. Thank you.